In the age of Henry VIII, where velvet gowns swept castle floors and ruffled collars reached for the heavens, cleanliness had a secret ingredient: urine. Collected in chamber pots and stored in barrels, human urine was prized not for its smell, but for its power. Rich in ammonia, it acted as a natural bleach, used to whiten linen and lift stains from royal garments. Laundresses soaked clothes in the pungent solution, scrubbing with a dedication that defied the stench. It was science before science, and fashion before comfort. But how did bodily waste become a household staple? And what does this odd Tudor tradition reveal about the messy pursuit of elegance in a world obsessed with appearances? In Tudor England, the splendor of the court dazzled foreign ambassadors. Tapestries woven in Flanders draped the stone walls of Whitehall. Gold-threaded gowns shimmered in candlelight, and Henry VIII himself strutted through the corridors like a lion in human flesh. Yet behind the glittering surface lay a reality far earthier, one that ordinary men and women confront daily: the need to keep fabrics clean in an age without soap as we know it. Beneath the grandeur of silks and linens, an invisible world of stains, odors, and grime threatened to reduce finery into rags. And so, England turned to one of its strangest allies: urine. For centuries, across Europe, urine had been harnessed as a tool of transformation. Known in scientific circles as lant, it was collected not as waste, but as resource. In the chemical logic of the 16th century, urine represented a reservoir of hidden power, an agent that could purify, bleach, and even harden cloth. It contained ammonia, though no Tudor launderer would have spoken in such terms. Instead, they knew by instinct and inheritance that the liquid, when allowed to ferment, could strip yellowing linen back to brightness, pulling the stains of life from the threads as if by alchemy. In the Tudor home, laundry was not a matter of pressing a button or shaking a bottle of detergent. It was a ritual of labor, mostly endured by women, servants, or washerwomen whose hands grew raw from immersion in lion lant. Linen was soaked in great wooden tubs, scrubbed on rough surfaces, beaten with paddles, and then hung to dry where the wind could reach it. The smell was acrid, unmistakable, yet its results were undeniable. White linen was a badge of dignity, visible proof of order in a chaotic world, and its maintenance justified even the strangest of methods. The Tudors wore linen closer to their skin than any other fabric. Under their magnificent velvet doublets and embroidered gowns, men and women alike layered themselves in shifts, shirts, and smocks of linen. These absorbed sweat, body oils, and dirt, sparing the more expensive outer garments. But the undergarments required constant washing. White linen symbolized not only cleanliness but moral purity, for in a society deeply shaped by Christian symbolism, the whiteness of cloth echoed the whiteness of the soul. To neglect it was to invite suspicion, shame, and even whispers of sin. Thus, laundry was not trivial, it was moral. In Henry VIII's England, laundries pulsed with activity. The king's own household employed entire teams of laundresses to keep the monarch's shirts spotless. Records from the royal accounts reveal the scale: dozens upon dozens of shirts ordered each year, each requiring careful washing, bleaching, and starching. Urine collected from chamber pots, privies, and sometimes donated by servants or even the public was stored in great earthenware jars. The longer it stood, the stronger its potency, for fermentation transformed it into a sharper, more caustic solution. Washerwomen knew to respect it. Its fumes burned the nostrils, but its bite on cloth was unmatched. The practice was not uniquely English. Roman fullers had once tread garments in vats of urine, stomping stains away with bare feet. Across medieval Europe, guilds of dyers and cloth finishers relied on it to cleanse and prepare wool. But in the Tudor world, it seeped into domestic life with particular intimacy. A Londoner might pass by a row of tubs outside a laundry house, the air thick with the sour tang of ammonia, and scarcely raise an eyebrow. It was the smell of cleanliness itself, the hidden scent beneath the fragrance of lavender or rosemary later applied to mask it. Scientific understanding, as we conceive of it today, was absent. Alchemy dominated thought, and substances were judged by qualities of hotness, coldness, dryness, or wetness. Urine, warm and moist, carried a transformative essence. Physicians analyzed its color to diagnose disease, while laundresses exploited its power to restore fabric. This dual role blurred the boundary between medicine and maintenance. A substance born from the body returned to serve it again, cycling through life's necessities with pragmatic efficiency. Yet, the paradox was stark. In a kingdom obsessed with appearances, the pure white linen displayed at court carried the ghost of a stench. For the nobility, whose wealth allowed them to bask in luxury, the connection between their shimmering shirts and the chamber pot remained hidden behind the labor of servants. But for the poor, who might sell their urine to fuller's yards for a penny, the connection was direct. Even waste could be commodified, transformed into value in a world where nothing went unused. Thus, the Tudor practice of laundering with urine was not merely an oddity, it was an emblem of survival. It revealed how a society balanced between grandeur and grit, between ideals of purity and the earthy realities of life. It exposed the ingenuity of ordinary people who harnessed what they had to maintain dignity in a world of limited means. And in doing so, it stitched together the lives of kings and peasants alike, bound by the invisible threads of linen, washed clean by a liquid they shared in common. The tale of urine as bleach is, in its way, the tale of Tudor England itself, a kingdom magnificent yet raw, splendid yet unpolished, forever balancing between the sublime and the sordid. As the 16th century unfolded, this practice would endure, woven into the rhythms of daily life, until the coming of new sciences and new soaps would relegate it to the shadows of history. But in Henry VIII's reign, it was no mere curiosity, it was necessity, pungent and powerful, the unseen companion to the age of splendor. In Tudor England, the unseen machinery of daily life was powered not by iron engines or complex devices, but by human bodies, bent backs, raw hands, and an endurance born of necessity. Nowhere was this more evident than in the laundries, where the whitening of linen was less a chore and more a battle, waged with water, fire, soap substitutes, and, most curiously, urine. While noblemen strutted through Henry VIII's court in freshly laundered shirts, the reality behind those immaculate garments was written on the red knuckles and blistered palms of washerwomen. The washerwoman's task began with collection. Linen, by its very nature, absorbed everything. It drank the sweat of courtiers during summer justs, it carried the stains of spilled wine from feasts, and it clung to the faint yellow traces of human life. Unlike wool, which could repel dirt, linen demanded frequent cleansing. A wealthy household might accumulate mountains of soiled shifts and shirts in a matter of days. These piles were carted to the laundry, where a team of women, often working outdoors in yards or by rivers, confronted them. The first act was sorting, a careful separation of fine cloth from coarse, for the same methods could not be applied equally to all. Then came the soaking. Great tubs of water stood ready, but water alone could not purge deep stains. Instead, washerwomen reached for lint. Collected from chamber pots, stored in barrels, sometimes purchased in bulk from the poor who sold their household waste. Urine was the secret weapon of the trade. It was not applied fresh, for only when left to stand did it acquire its full potency. Days, even weeks of fermentation allowed the liquid to transform, producing a pungent strength that cut through grease and grime. To immerse linen in such a bath was to surrender it to a natural chemical process, though the Tudors would not have spoken of chemistry, only of craft. The scene itself was one of contradictions. On wash days, yards filled with the acrid scent of ammonia. The stench clung to the nostrils, overpowering and unpleasant. Yet alongside it came the sight of fabrics gradually shifting from gray-yellow to pale white. The washerwomen, accustomed to this pungency, pressed on without hesitation. They knew the rhythm: soaking, scrubbing, rinsing, and beating. Their bodies became instruments of purification, channeling the hidden power of urine into visible transformation. To modern sensibilities, the notion seems grotesque. But to the Tudor mind, the use of urine was practical, efficient, and deeply rooted in tradition. Laundry was not judged only by its scent in the moment of washing, but by its brightness after drying. The smell could be masked with herbs. Sprigs of rosemary, lavender, or sweet marjoram were often thrown into rinse water, infusing linens with a gentler aroma. In some households, starch was applied, stiffening collars and ruffs, giving garments the sharp lines that marked status and fashion. But none of this would have been possible without the first stage, the purging power of land. For washerwomen, the work was relentless. Kneeling over tubs, they plunged their arms into cold or caustic water for hours, scrubbing cloth against wooden boards or pounding it with beetles, flat wooden mallets designed for the purpose. Winter brought numb fingers, summer brought burning sun, yet the labor remained constant. It was both exhausting and dangerous, for constant exposure to lye and urine could corrode skin, leaving rashes and sores. Still, there was dignity in the craft. To produce linens fit for a nobleman's back was to engage in an act of visible service, even if the service itself remained invisible. Laundry houses near London became notorious for their smell, but they were essential to urban life. With rivers like the Thames running foul with waste, washerwomen sometimes sought cleaner tributaries or wells, jealously guarded for their clarity. In towns and villages, riversides became communal sites of labor, where women exchanged gossip while wringing sheets and shirts. Children sometimes helped gather sticks for fires or carried buckets of water, their childhood intertwined with the rituals of fabric. For the poorest, selling urine itself could be a survival strategy. A penny here or there, gained by handing over the contents of a chamber pot to a fuller's yard, might mean bread on the table. Thus, urine was not only bleach, it was currency. Within the royal household, the scale was magnified. Henry VIII's laundresses faced the endless tide of the king's appetite for fresh linen. Records show that Henry demanded multiple shirts a day, especially in his younger years, when justs, hunts, and dances filled his hours. Each garment had to be spotless. The laundresses of the royal household became silent custodians of the king's image. Their work was invisible at court but essential to the spectacle of monarchy. For how could majesty be embodied in a man whose shirts bore stains? These women labored not merely for pay but under the weight of symbolic importance. Linen was purity. To present a sovereign in stained garments was unthinkable. Thus, they turned to the strongest agents available. While nobles pretended ignorance of the origins of their brilliant whites, washerwomen knew full well that the secret of splendor lay in the humble chamber pot. The contrast could not have been sharper. The courtier basked in the illusion of refinement, while the laundress endured the pungency of reality. Beyond the palace, ordinary Englishmen and women confronted the same needs, though on a humbler scale. For them, laundry was bound up with rhythm of seasons, weather, and water supply. A rainy week could delay washing, forcing families to wear garments longer than usual. The poor owned fewer linens, which meant their washing days carried even greater urgency. Clothes were soaked, scrubbed, and laid out on hedges to dry. The sight of linen spread across fields became almost symbolic of life cycles. Dirty garments going in, clean garments emerging, whitened by sun and land alike. Yet, despite the drudgery, laundry was social. Women gathered in groups, their voices carrying across riversides. Songs were sung, stories told, grievances aired. In those moments, the washerwomen of Tudor England carved out spaces of solidarity, bound not only by labor, but by shared endurance. They were keepers of knowledge, too, knowing how long to soak, how to balance lye and urine, how to keep fabric from rotting under too harsh a mixture. Their expertise, inherited from mothers and grandmothers, kept linen from disintegration and households from disgrace. If one imagines the Tudor world only in terms of palaces and politics, this story seems trivial. Yet it reveals a deeper truth. Civilization rests not only on kings and wars, but on the unheralded labor of ordinary people. The shine of a courtier's sleeve, the spotless collar of a statesman, the dignity of a noblewoman's gown, all depended on the women who endured the acrid fumes of land. Their toil was not recorded in chronicles or celebrated in verse. It lingered only in the brightness of fabric, in the ghost of lavender masking ammonia, in the fleeting impression of cleanliness that society mistook for natural order. Thus, the practice of using urine to whiten laundry was no mere eccentricity. It was the backbone of domestic survival. It linked noble court to peasant cottage, bound together by necessity and ingenuity. And while history has chosen to celebrate the grandeur of Tudor spectacle, the reality is that beneath every shimmering garment lay the hidden labor of washerwomen, and beneath their labor, the acrid power of urine. The Tudor world did not think in molecules and chemical bonds, but in humors, essences, and the mysterious balance of nature. The urine that washerwomen handled as practical bleach was also, in the eyes of Tudor physicians and alchemists, a liquid of wonder and mystery. It was a waste, yes, but also a mirror of the body's hidden state, a diagnostic tool, and for some, even a substance that hinted at transformation. To understand why urine became so central to laundry is to enter into the realm of alchemy, where science and superstition mingled freely, and where the line between cleaning cloth and curing bodies blurred into one philosophy of nature. In Tudor medicine, the human body was governed by four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health arose from their balance, illness from their imbalance. Physicians believed urine revealed this internal harmony. The art of uroscopy, or urine examination, was a respected diagnostic practice. Doctors peered into glass flasks, holding them up to the light, examining color, sediment, and even smell. Pale urine might suggest weakness, while dark or cloudy urine could reveal fever, flux, or corruption. Whole treatises were written on the shades of yellow, the textures of deposits, the bubbles floating at the surface. To a physician, the chamber pot was a window into the soul. But urine was more than a tool for diagnosis. It was a substance of power. Alchemists, heirs to ancient traditions stretching back to Arabic and Greco-Roman scholars, saw in it the possibility of transformation. In its pungent vapors, they sought hidden salts, mercurial essences, or even the philosopher's stone. Some believed urine contained a fiery principle of life itself. Distilled in alembics, it yielded ammonia salts and phosphorus compounds, though no Tudor scientist would have recognized these in modern terms. Instead, they saw the release of spirits, the extraction of hidden virtues. The notion that the same liquid could whiten cloth seemed to confirm its potency. It cleansed the body by reflection, and it cleansed fabric by action. This mingling of medical and practical use meant that laundresses and physicians were not so far apart as one might assume. Both dealt with the same pungent liquid, one to strip stains from fabric, the other to strip disease from diagnosis. The overlap fostered a cultural logic. Urine was not simply waste, but a substance in which the secrets of life and purity resided. To immerse linen in it was, in a sense, to restore the cloth to its natural balance, just as a physician sought to restore a patient. The alchemical imagination of Tudor England amplified this perception. In an age when metallurgy and medicine were entwined, when sulfur, salt, and mercury were thought to underpin all material existence, urine became one of the primal substances available to experiment. It fermented, it fumed, it transformed. Qualities that aligned perfectly with the alchemist's search for change. Some texts hinted that the golden color of urine carried echoes of the sun, while others linked its volatile vapors to the airy spirits of life. Thus, what washerwomen experienced as acrid practicality, scholars dressed in robes of philosophy. Both, however, arrived at the same conclusion: urine worked. Practical alchemy fed into laundry as well. Soap, when available, was costly, made from animal fats and imported oils. It did not suffice for large-scale cleaning of linen, especially in royal or noble households where volumes of fabric accumulated weekly. Urine, freely available and endlessly renewable, filled the gap. Its ammonia broke down organic matter, lifting stains, and its alkaline nature brightened cloth. The Tudors did not name these processes as chemistry, but they recognized their effects with clarity. To steep linen in lant was to unlock a hidden transformation, alchemy, in the basin. It is telling that laundries and laboratories often shared similar equipment. Great tubs for soaking cloth were not unlike vats used for brewing or for alchemical distillation. Glass flasks used by physicians to study urine were cousins of the same vessels in which alchemists boiled and condensed substances. The everyday act of collecting chamber pots for laundry was thus part of a wider worldview. Waste was never merely discarded, but cycled back into systems of meaning and utility. The moral and spiritual layers of the practice cannot be ignored. In Christianity, purity was a constant theme. Souls washed clean, garments white as snow in biblical imagery. To cleanse linen until it shone was not merely aesthetic, it was moral theater. White linen reflected the state of a household, suggesting piety, discipline, and order. That such whiteness arose from urine only heightened the paradox. Impurity producing purity, waste birthing dignity. For an alchemist, this paradox was proof of nature's secret unity, the way opposites intertwined to create balance. For a laundress, it was simply the truth of her craft. Yet, not all saw it as noble. There were satirical songs and bawdy verses mocking the reliance on chamber pots. The idea that noble garments, worn at feasts and ceremonies, had passed through the fumes of urine carried a whiff of ridicule. Foreign visitors sometimes remarked upon it, half amused, half disgusted. But within England, the practice was so common that it rarely drew comment. To mock it was to mock necessity itself, and necessity always has the last laugh. The alchemical dimension of urine reached even further. Beyond laundry, urine found its way into recipes for dyes, tanning leather, and even in attempts to create medical cures. Powdered salts extracted from urine were administered for various ailments, from epilepsy to skin conditions. Some believed urine applied externally could ease wounds or burns. In this context, the act of laundry was simply another extension of urine's versatility. The same liquid that a physician might prescribe for healing could be used to brighten a shirt. Such was the seamless web of Tudor thought, where medicine, alchemy, and domestic labor were threads of one fabric. By the reign of Henry VIII, these practices were well established. They did not arise suddenly, but descended from centuries of inherited knowledge. Roman fullers, medieval dyers, and continental alchemists all contributed to a tradition that placed urine at the center of transformation. In Tudor England, this legacy blossomed into a daily rhythm, quietly underpinning the visual splendor of the age. Henry's dazzling court, Elizabeth's starched collars, the shining altar cloths of cathedrals, all owed their brilliance to this humble substance. The paradox was complete. The most exalted symbols of majesty were sustained by the lowliest of liquids. And so, the chamber pot became not only a receptacle of waste, but a crucible of transformation. In every Tudor home, it symbolized the hidden alchemy of survival, the power to turn foulness into utility, decay into dignity, waste into whiteness. The philosophy of alchemy, so often dismissed today as superstition, lived in the daily work of washerwomen, proving itself not in the philosopher's stone, but in the gleam of linen spread across hedges to dry in the English sun. It is here, in the mingling of urine's medical, alchemical, and practical roles, that the heart of Tudor laundry lies. The laundress, the physician, and the alchemist each saw in urine a key to transformation. They spoke different languages, of craft, of humors, of spirits, but they described the same truth. Urine whitened linen. Urine revealed illness. Urine carried within it the paradox of Tudor life itself. The basest thing made noble, the foulest smell made fruitful, the most intimate of wastes turned into a public display of purity. Majesty is as much performance as it is power. Henry VIII, more than most monarchs, understood this truth with instinctive brilliance. He was not only king, but spectacle. His body, his clothing, his very presence were instruments of rule. In an age before newspapers and portraits widely circulated, his court appearances were living propaganda. And at the heart of this spectacle was linen. The garments nearest to his body, though unseen beneath silks and velvets, carried symbolic weight. Clean, white, and abundant, they proclaimed wealth, order, and divinely sanctioned power. Yet the illusion of spotless magnificence rested on the unlikeliest foundation: tubs of fermented urine in the laundries of England. Henry's obsession with clothing is legendary. Contemporary accounts describe his wardrobe as staggering: velvet doublets encrusted with jewels, gowns lined with fur, cloaks edged with gold thread. But beneath these marvels lay the constant layer of linen. He wore fresh shirts daily, sometimes several in a single day. A banquet could demand one, a hunt another, an audience yet another. Sweat, spills, and the inevitable toll of his immense frame demanded endless changes. Thus, the laundry of Henry's court churned constantly, a quiet industry dedicated to feeding his hunger for fresh linen. Royal accounts record hundreds of shirts made each year, stitched from the finest flax linen, imported or spun at home. Each was destined not only to cover the king's body, but to become part of his political theater. A spotless shirt beneath an open doublet suggested virility, strength, and cleanliness, qualities a monarch wished to embody. To appear stained, yellowed, or rumpled was unthinkable. In a society where clothing carried moral and political meaning, Henry's laundry became an extension of governance. His shirts were his armor in the battle of appearances. Yet, behind this gleam lay the pungent reality. The laundresses of the royal household, often invisible in the chronicles, soaked, scrubbed, and bleached his garments in vats of lint. The acrid fumes clung to their skin, but their work enabled the king to stride forth as an icon of magnificence. They labored in stone-out buildings or riverside yards, away from the perfumed chambers of court, yet their toil was as crucial as the decisions made in council. For what was majesty if the king appeared in stained linen? The political machinery of monarchy required clean shirts as much as polished speeches. Henry himself may not have acknowledged this connection, but he embodied its results. The king who sought to rival Francis I of France and the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V needed spectacle. At the Field of Cloth of Gold in 1520, Henry dazzled with tints of golden fabric, fountains running with wine, and tournaments of staggering scale. Yet, his body remained the centerpiece. In accounts of his appearances, observers linger on descriptions of his glittering doublets and the whiteness of his linen. Linen, after all, framed the face, peaked at collars and cuffs, suggested order beneath splendor. Even in the midst of lavish display, it was the whiteness that lent credibility. It is a paradox worth pausing over. Henry, a king whose appetites and ego knew no bounds, relied on a substance the world considered base. His magnificent shirts, the very symbol of Tudor refinement, were made dazzling by the chemistry of chamber pots. It was an irony that Tudor society largely ignored, for necessity overrode disgust. Yet, it reveals the fragility of spectacle. Grandeur is never self-sufficient, but built on hidden labors, hidden processes, hidden substances. Beneath the roar of cannons and the glitter of jewels, the acrid sting of urine lay quietly at the foundations. The importance of linen in Henry's court extended beyond vanity. Linen undergarments absorbed the sweat and oils that could otherwise ruin costly outer garments. They were the first defense of the wardrobe. A king's clothing was not only personal attire but a treasury of wealth, a mobile gallery of England's prestige. To preserve it, linen bore the burden of contact with the body. Thus, laundry was a matter of economy as well as appearance. The more effectively linen could be whitened and refreshed, the longer the outer garments endured. Urine, with its bleaching power, played a silent role in protecting England's material splendor. Henry's personal vanity heightened this reliance. His expanding waistline and physical decline in later years demanded ever more clothing, ever more laundering. As gout swelled his legs and ulcers afflicted his body, his shirts became both shield and disguise. They absorbed not only sweat but the indignities of illness, then passed into the laundress's hands to be stripped of stain and smell. In this way, urine served not merely to whiten fabric but to maintain the illusion of kingly vigor. The laundresses bore the burden of transforming the evidence of decline into the semblance of vitality. It is telling that in inventories of Henry's possessions, linen is always present. It may not glitter like jewels or endure like armor, but it was essential to his self-presentation. The king who broke from Rome, who reshaped religion, who married 6 wives and fathered a dynasty, appeared before the world in shirts whitened by urine. The paradox is almost Shakespearean, greatness clothed in garments made radiant by waste. But such was the reality of Tudor life, where necessity shaped even the loftiest dreams of magnificence. The laundresses themselves, though nameless in history, stand as silent participants in Henry's theater. Their labor carried political weight. When they soaked linen in vats of lint, they were not only washing cloth, they were sustaining monarchy. Their hands, red and raw, helped build the spectacle of power. Without them, Henry could not have appeared as majesty incarnate. The irony deepens. Women of low station, laboring in stink and sweat, became co-authors of the image that dominated Europe. In this lies a lesson about the nature of history. Kings are remembered for battles and decrees, but their power rests on the unnoticed labors of the many. Linen whitened by urine was the invisible stage upon which Henry acted his role. His magnificence was stitched, scrubbed, and soaked into being by the hands of those history forgot. Yet, without them, the story of Tudor splendor would be threadbare indeed. And so, Henry VIII's obsession with linen reveals the strange interdependence of majesty and mundanity. His dazzling image, so carefully curated, was built upon the acrid fumes of laundry yards. His virility, so proudly displayed, was safeguarded by shirts bleached in urine. The Tudor practice, then, was not eccentricity but foundation. It tied the chamber pot to the throne, the laundress to the king, the stink of ammonia to the perfume of power. Majesty, like linen, required constant cleansing, and in Henry's court, that cleansing flowed from the most humble of sources. In the Tudor imagination, waste was never merely discarded. It was collected, reused, transformed, and integrated into the rhythms of survival. Among the strangest yet most practical examples of this thrift was the trade in urine. While nobles might prefer to ignore the origins of their brilliantly white linen, in villages and towns across England, urine was not simply a byproduct of human life. It was a resource, a commodity, a form of currency exchanged in the silent economy that underpinned daily existence. Every Tudor household, whether grand or humble, produced urine. Chamber pots filled through the night, privies accumulated their rank reserves, and buckets in poorer cottages brimmed with the unavoidable product of human bodies. To pour it away would be to waste opportunity. Instead, families collected it, storing it in clay jugs or wooden tubs until it fermented into lant, the prized version needed for bleaching. In wealthier households, this urine might be handed directly to laundresses for use in domestic washing. But for the poor, urine could be sold. The purchase of urine was not a formal market transaction, but it was nonetheless commerce. Fullers, those responsible for cleansing and finishing cloth, were among the largest buyers. Tanneries, dyers, and laundries all required steady supplies. Thus, a poor family in London or York might save chamber pots for collection, trading the liquid for a small coin or in-kind payment. It was, in effect, the recycling economy of Tudor England, a system where nothing was wasted, where even the body's foulest product could be converted into bread. The sums were not great, but in an age of scarcity, every penny mattered. Selling urine became one of the countless minor strategies of survival that poor households adopted. A widow might supplement her meager income by exchanging her household's waste with a local laundry. Children, sent to empty chamber pots, learned that their labor carried value. In this sense, urine linked directly to the economy of subsistence. It was part of a world where thrift was not virtue but necessity. In towns and cities, the collection of urine sometimes took on larger organization. Fullers' yards and dye workshops established agreements with neighborhoods, ensuring steady supply. The stench of such yards became notorious, yet the work they enabled clothed communities in garments clean and bright. Foreign visitors, unaccustomed to the ubiquity of urine in industry, often remarked with disgust on the acrid odors drifting from these districts. For locals, however, the smell was not filth but labor, a sign that work was being done, cloth was being finished, linen was being whitened. Within households themselves, urine collection took on ritual patterns. Chamber pots were emptied each morning, contents poured into storage vessels. These were left to ferment, sometimes covered loosely, sometimes not at all. The longer the urine aged, the more potent its ammonia became. Washerwomen knew to wait for this sharpness, to test by scent when the liquid had matured to full strength. A household with many members could accumulate enough to sustain its own laundry needs, while smaller households often contributed their supply to communal washing days. Thus, urine not only linked to economy, but to social cooperation. It is striking that Tudor society, so deeply hierarchical, blurred class boundaries through urine. Kings and peasants alike depended on the same substance for their linen. The difference lay only in scale. Henry VIII's laundresses required great quantities, gathered through organized systems, while a categore's wife might rely solely on her family's chamber pots. Yet in both cases, the principle was the same. Waste became resource, filth became tool, necessity trumped disgust. This shared reliance knit together the fabric of Tudor England, uniting palace and hovel in unseen commonality. The trade in urine also exposed the porous boundaries between private life and public need. Urine was the most intimate of products, generated in secrecy, linked to shame. Yet, it was also thrust into commerce, carried through streets in buckets, poured into communal vats. What was most personal became most public. This paradox reflected the wider reality of Tudor life, where the body itself was communal property in times of need. A person's urine could serve not only their household but their neighbors, their towns, even their king's laundry. The body was inextricably tied to economy. For laundresses and fullers, securing sufficient urine was as vital as firewood or water. Without it, stains lingered, whiteness dulled, garments fell into disrepute. The rhythm of their work depended on a constant inflow of land. In this sense, urine became not just a commodity, but infrastructure, an invisible supply chain sustaining Tudor cleanliness. It linked households to industries, industries to courts, and courts to the performance of majesty. The economic web of urine stretched farther than one might imagine. This economy of waste reveals something profound about Tudor resilience. In a world without industrial detergents, without chemical laboratories, people turned instinctively to what was available. They transformed necessity into virtue, finding utility in what might otherwise be discarded. To modern eyes, it seems crude. To them, it was ingenious. It exemplified the thrift and resourcefulness that allowed Tudor society to survive, even flourish, amid scarcity. Nothing was truly useless. Every substance had its place. The paradox extended to moral meaning. Waste, associated with impurity, became the key to producing purity. Linen whitened by urine stood as symbol of order, discipline, and virtue. To wear white was to project cleanliness of body and soul. Thus, the economy of urine fed into the economy of morality. The poorest who sold their chamber pot contents played an unseen role in sustaining the moral fabric of society, providing the raw material for garments that proclaimed piety and respectability. Foreigners sometimes mocked the English for this reliance, but the practice was not unique to England. Across Europe, similar systems thrived. In France, gatherers of urine were known figures in cities. In Scotland and Ireland, urine was prized for wool preparation as much as for laundry. The Tudors were simply part of a broader tradition that stretched back to antiquity. Roman emperors had even taxed the collection of urine, recognizing its industrial value. In that sense, Henry VIII's court was not eccentric, but heir to a long lineage of waste-based economies. Still, the Tudor use of urine possessed its own character. It was bound up not only in industry, but in the performance of majesty. The economy of waste served the economy of spectacle. Every shirt bleached in lant contributed to the illusion of royal magnificence. Every penny earned from chamber pot sales linked the poor to the throne. The stink of urine clung not only to laundry yards but, in invisible fashion, to the very heart of monarchy. Thus, the story of Tudor laundry is also the story of Tudor economy, an economy where waste had value, where nothing was discarded without thought, where the most intimate act could feed into the grandeur of kings. It reminds us that history's great spectacles rest upon humble foundations, that beneath the silks of Henry's court lay the acrid chemistry of everyday survival. Urine, humble and foul, became currency, commodity, and cornerstone of Tudor life. In Tudor England, whiteness was more than a color. It was an emblem, a proclamation, a language in cloth that spoke of purity, order, and virtue. To walk through the streets of London or the halls of Henry VIII's court was to see linen everywhere, collars gleaming, cuffs crisp, altar cloths radiant, bed sheets spread like banners of discipline. This whiteness was not easily won. It came at the price of endless labor, of scrubbing and soaking, of laundresses enduring the acrid fumes of land. Yet it carried a meaning that stretched far beyond the realm of fabric. It reached into the moral imagination of the Tudor world, where laundry became not just a domestic necessity, but a performance of spiritual order. Christianity saturated every corner of Tudor life, and its imagery shaped perceptions of cleanliness. In Scripture, whiteness signified holiness, garments washed, white as snow, saints robed in radiant linen, Christ himself depicted in gleaming white at the Transfiguration. Purity of soul was mirrored in purity of cloth. A stained shirt could hint not only at negligence, but at moral disorder. Thus, the whitening of linen was not trivial. It was symbolic work, transforming garments into visual signs of inner discipline. A household with bright linen proclaimed its virtue, while one with yellowed or grimy fabric risked whispers of sloth and sin. This symbolism weighed especially heavily on women. Mistresses of households were judged by the state of their linens. To keep them spotless was proof of diligence, orderliness, and moral rectitude. To fail was to invite suspicion. In a society where virtue was often measured by appearances, laundry became a moral test. The laundress's scrubbing was more than physical. It was a form of moral cleansing enacted upon the fabric of daily life. A shirt emerging white from a vat of urine was not just clean. It was vindicated, transformed from impurity to virtue. The church itself reinforced this association. Altars were dressed in white linens, carefully laundered, starched, and perfumed. These cloths were washed with as much devotion as they were with water, for they touched the sacred. To see a sullied altar cloth would have been scandalous, for it suggested irreverence. Thus, laundresses employed by religious institutions carried weighty responsibility. Their work bore theological significance. Just as sin stained the soul, dirt stained linen. Just as confession and grace restored purity, so too did soaking and bleaching. The parallels were evident to every Tudor mind. At court, whiteness became fashion as well as morality. Starch, introduced from the Low Countries, allowed collars and ruffs to be stiffened and shaped into elaborate forms. These crisp whites framed the face, catching the eye, symbolizing refinement. Yet starch alone could not create the effect. It required the foundation of perfectly whitened linen. Behind every ruff or collar lay the hidden work of urine and labor, the transformation of cloth from stained to spotless. Fashion thus leaned on morality, and morality leaned on chemistry. This obsession with whiteness did not stop at garments. Bed linens, tablecloths, and napkins all carried symbolic weight. To present guests with white table linen was to offer them not only hospitality, but respect. To sleep in white sheets was to rest in order, to dream in purity. The entire rhythm of domestic life became saturated with the moral significance of laundry. It was not enough to own cloth. It had to shine. It had to proclaim order. The laundress's labor became the household's reputation, spread on hedges to dry in the sun where neighbors could see and judge. Yet the paradox remained. This moral whiteness was achieved through what was considered most foul. Urine, the byproduct of digestion, associated with impurity and secrecy, became the means of attaining purity. The irony would not have been lost on Tudor minds, steeped as they were in religious paradoxes. The meek made mighty, the last made first, sin redeemed into salvation. Laundry embodied this theology in practice. Waste became the tool of virtue. Stink became the servant of sanctity. It was as though God himself had hidden purity within impurity, waiting for human hands to draw it forth. The symbolism of whiteness also carried political force. In Henry VIII's court, where appearances were paramount, white linen served as proof of order in a kingdom rife with change. The Reformation tore England from Rome, monasteries dissolved, new doctrines spread. Amid such upheaval, whiteness became stability. Courtiers paraded in crisp collars as though to declare that order still reigned, that purity was intact even as the old world cracked. White linen was monarchy's answer to chaos, a visible sign that beneath political turbulence, the kingdom remained clean. For the poor, the stakes were equally high, though in humbler form. A family might own only a few sets of linen, but keeping them white was essential to dignity. Neighbors judged, employers noticed, priests observed. To appear in church with grimy linen was to risk shame. Thus, even the poorest relied on urine, saving chamber pots, soaking their few garments, striving to whiten what little they had. In this way, morality was democratized, kings and paupers alike were bound by the need for whiteness. It was one of the rare social equalizers in a world of brutal hierarchies. The whiteness of linen, then, was never merely aesthetic. It was a statement of faith, a marker of virtue, a shield against suspicion, and a weapon in the theater of power. Its brilliance reflected not only sunlight, but morality. Every time a laundress pulled a shirt from a vat of urine, wrung it out, and laid it across a hedge to dry, she was not only cleaning cloth, but reinforcing the moral architecture of her society. She was sustaining the illusion that purity was possible, that order could be restored, that waste itself could be redeemed. In this lies the strange beauty of Tudor laundry. It was theology in action, a ritual of redemption enacted upon fabric. Whiteness became the language of virtue, and urine, paradoxically, its most faithful servant. If the Tudor court turned laundry into a theater of majesty, the villages and towns of England transformed it into ritual. Wash day was not a private affair tucked away behind closed doors, but a communal performance that echoed across riversides, village greens, and cottage yards. It was labor, yes, but also rhythm, gathering, and story. And at its heart lay the unmistakable presence of urine, stored, fermented, and wielded as the hidden force that turned stained cloth into whitened linen. The rhythm of Tudor life was marked by cycles, planting and harvest, feasts and fasts, marriages and deaths. Among these, wash day carved out its own space, returning every week or two depending on the size of a household. It was dreaded for its labor, yet necessary for survival and reputation. In towns, the sight of laundresses gathering by streams became part of the week's pattern, as familiar as the market or the church bell. The hiss of water poured into tubs, the slap of fabric beaten with paddles, the murmur of women's voices mingling with the scent of lant and lye. It was as much soundscape as it was spectacle. Preparation began days before. Chamber pots were emptied into storage vessels, urine left to mature into its most potent form. Wooden tubs were dragged from corners, scrubbed, and filled. Bundles of soiled linens were sorted, shirts, shifts, bed sheets, napkins, tablecloths. A household might accumulate staggering piles, for linen absorbed every trace of human life. Unlike wool or leather, which could go weeks without cleaning, linen demanded constant renewal. And so, laundresses assembled tools: beetles for beating cloth, sticks for stirring, cauldrons for boiling water, herbs for perfuming. Wash day required an arsenal. When the day itself arrived, work began early. Fires were lit to heat water, filling the air with smoke. Tubs were prepared with mixtures of water, ashes, or lant. The first stage was soaking. Fabric plunged into tubs of urine, left to steep until stains loosened. The air grew thick with ammonia, but laundresses pressed on, immune to disgust. To them, it was simply the smell of work. After soaking came scrubbing. Women bent over boards, knuckles raw, arms aching, scouring linen against wood grain. The sound of fabric rasping echoed through yards, mingling with laughter, gossip, and complaint. Children ran about, fetching water, carrying sticks, or chasing each other between drying lines. Communal washing sites were spaces of solidarity. Women worked side by side, trading news, singing songs, telling stories. It was in these gatherings that local gossip spread: who was ill, who was courting, who had quarreled with neighbors. In a society where female voices were often marginalized, wash day became a forum, a place where women spoke freely while their hands labored. The whiteness of linen emerged not only from urine and water, but from the collective strength of women bound together in toil. Drying transformed villages into patchworks of white. Hedgerows became hung with shirts and shifts, commons dotted with sheets billowing in the wind. To walk through a village after wash day was to walk through a gallery of fabric, each household's dignity on display. Neighbors could not help but notice whose linens shone brightest, whose bore lingering stains, whose lacked abundance. In this way, laundry became public testimony. To keep white linen was to proclaim order and respectability. To fail was to risk whispers of neglect or poverty. Wash day was thus not only communal labor, but communal judgment. The symbolism extended further. For many, wash day echoed biblical rhythms of cleansing and renewal. Just as the soul required confession, so too did fabric require purification. The laundress became a kind of priestess, mediating between impurity and restored order. The act of soaking garments in urine, then rinsing them clean in rivers, mirrored spiritual cycles of sin and absolution. Whether consciously or not, the ritual carried theological resonance. Linen emerged from tubs transformed, just as the soul was imagined to emerge from sacrament renewed. The role of herbs added another layer. Rosemary, lavender, and marjoram were prized for their scent and symbolic meaning. To add them to rinse water was to mask the pungency of urine, but also to infuse garments with associations of healing, love, and virtue. A shift that smelled faintly of lavender was more than pleasant. It was a blessing, carrying with it connotations of purity and care. In this way, wash day wove together chemistry, labor, and symbolism into one ritual of renewal. Yet the work was brutal. Hours of bending, lifting, and scrubbing left women exhausted. Fingers cracked from lye and urine, backs ached from lifting tubs, and smoke from fires stung eyes. Wash day could stretch from dawn to dusk, leaving little strength for anything else. Still, the rhythm persisted, because the stakes were high. To neglect laundry was to risk health, dignity, and reputation. Clean linen protected against disease by absorbing sweat and filth, then carrying it away. It preserved expensive garments, extending their life. It marked a household as orderly and virtuous. No matter the toll, wash day could not be skipped. In cities like London, the communal nature intensified. Public washhouses and laundries buzzed with activity, drawing women from across neighborhoods. The Thames and its tributaries bore witness to endless rinsing, even as the river itself grew foul with waste. Foreign visitors often remarked on the spectacle, rows of women kneeling, beating garments, spreading sheets to dry in smoky air. To outsiders, it seemed chaotic, but to locals, it was order, an essential rhythm in the life of the city. The stench of urine and soap mingled with the scent of cooking fires and horse dung, forming the olfactory tapestry of Tudor urban life. In villages, the intimacy was greater. Wash day reinforced bonds among neighbors, but also rivalries. A woman whose linens gleamed could bask in quiet pride. One whose remained dingy might face whispers of laziness. Thus, wash day became both solidarity and contest. It reinforced community, yet it also sharpened distinctions. Laundry, seemingly humble, became one of the most visible markers of status and morality. The communal ritual of wash day also ensured the survival of knowledge. Techniques were passed down from mother to daughter, refined through generations. How long to soak, how much urine to use, when to add herbs, how to beat cloth without tearing. It was a body of craft as intricate as any guild trade. Though unrecorded in books, it was written in muscle memory and oral tradition, sustained by repetition. In this way, women preserved not only the cleanliness of their households, but the continuity of culture itself. Thus, wash day in Tudor England was far more than a domestic chore. It was a ritual of survival, morality, and identity, enacted in public, sustained by urine, and shared among women whose labor underpinned the fabric of society. The sight of linens gleaming in the sun was more than cleanliness. It was a proclamation of order, virtue, and communal strength. Beneath it all lingered the acrid scent of land, silent reminder that even the foulest waste could become the foundation of purity. Though the Tudor laundress bending over her tub may seem peculiar to modern eyes, she was not alone in her craft. Across Europe, from the cobbled streets of Paris to the canals of Venice, from the wool markets of Flanders to the sun-baked towns of Castile, urine formed the hidden bedrock of cleanliness and cloth-making. The Tudors may have perfected their ritual, but their neighbors shared in the same pungent wisdom. Urine was a common denominator of civilization, an invisible bridge that linked households, industries, and kingdoms across the continent. The French were no strangers to this practice. In Paris, the Guild of Fullers relied heavily on urine to cleanse and thicken wool. The streets echoed with the cry of "Eau d'urine" as collectors moved through neighborhoods, purchasing chamber pot contents from residents. Households were encouraged not to discard but to save their urine for collection, a civic duty that tied the private act of relieving oneself to the grand machinery of France's textile economy. French satirists delighted in mocking the stink of fullers' yards, yet no one denied their necessity. Even noble households, obsessed with refinement, ultimately clothed themselves in garments purified by the humble chamber pot. In the Low Countries, particularly Flanders, the use of urine was central to the textile trade that made the region wealthy. Flemish cloth was prized across Europe, known for its softness and sheen. Behind this brilliance lay vats of urine in which wool was soaked, trodden, and scoured. The fullers of Bruges and Ghent were famed for their skill, and their reliance on urine was so absolute that civic regulations were passed to ensure steady supply. In some towns, public urinals were established not out of concern for sanitation, but to guarantee raw material for the cloth trade. Waste was redirected into profit, fueling an industry that clothed kings and merchants alike. Spain, too, bore witness to the commerce of urine. In Castile, leather tanners and dyers prized it as essential for softening hides and fixing colors. Households sold their urine to workshops, turning bodily waste into economic exchange. The pungency of tanning districts became infamous, yet they thrived, sustaining one of Spain's most important industries. Even as Spanish explorers returned from the New World with silver and gold, it was urine that underpinned the humble crafts at home. Gold adorned courts, but urine sustained daily life. Italy, cradle of Renaissance refinement, did not shy from this earthy necessity. In Florence and Venice, laundresses worked along rivers and canals, their tubs filled with a mixture of water, ashes, and urine. The same cities that produced the finest art and philosophy of the age also produced a stench familiar to every working district. Venetian dyers, in particular, relied on urine to fix the brilliant reds and blues that adorned patrician robes. The irony was stark. While Titian painted luminous canvases and architects raised palaces, the very fabrics of Venice's ruling class owed their brilliance to fermented waste. Even in the far north, urine played its role. In Scotland and Ireland, the fulling of wool, known as walking in Gaelic, was inseparable from urine. Women gathered to tread cloth with their feet, singing rhythmic walking songs as they worked, their voices rising above the acrid fumes. These songs, still preserved in fragments, bear witness to the communal nature of the craft. Urine was not only tool but companion, woven into cultural expression, into music and memory. The ubiquity of urine in Europe's industries reveals much about the continent's resourcefulness. In an age before synthetic chemicals, people turned instinctively to what was available. Urine, produced daily and in abundance, became the great equalizer. Every body produced it, every household collected it, every industry found uses for it. It crossed social boundaries. Kings and peasants alike contributed to the same supply. It blurred the line between waste and wealth, revealing a society where nothing was ever truly useless. Roman precedent lingered in memory. Centuries earlier, Emperor Vespasian had famously taxed urine collection, recognizing its industrial value. His remark, pecunia non olet, money does not stink, resonated through the ages. By the 16th century, Europe lived that maxim daily. Urine stank, yes, but it also whitened linen, softened leather, cleansed wool, fixed dyes, and in doing so, generated wealth. The paradox was embraced. Foulness could yield fortune. Foreign travelers noted the practice with fascination or disgust. Germans visiting London remarked on the sour odor of laundries, while English visitors to Bruges commented on the smell of fullers' yards. Yet these observations carried no shock. The practice was too universal to mock seriously. To criticize another nation's reliance on urine was to ignore one's own. Waste was Europe's shared resource, hidden in plain sight, sustaining economies that clothed and adorned millions. What distinguished England within this wider context was not the practice itself, but the symbolism it acquired. In France or Spain, urine remained largely industrial, tied to guilds and workshops. In England, especially in the Tudor imagination, it penetrated domestic life more intimately. The whitening of linen in homes and households took on moral and spiritual dimensions, transforming laundry into a ritual of virtue. While the French fuller sought efficiency, the English laundress sought dignity. Both used urine, but in England, its role extended into theology and morality, binding waste to virtue in ways more profound than on the continent. Nevertheless, the shared European reliance reveals a continent bound together not only by trade routes and wars, but by tubs of land. Behind the splendor of Renaissance courts, behind the glitter of merchant wealth, behind the painted brilliance of canvases, lay the acrid chemistry of urine. It was Europe's hidden lifeblood, its silent servant, its most unacknowledged yet indispensable ally. And so, when Henry VIII donned a freshly whitened shirt, he was not merely Tudor but European, participant in a continental tradition of transformation. His linen connected him to laundresses in Venice, fullers in Bruges, tanners in Seville, and washerwomen along the Seine. Across borders and languages, the stench of urine united a continent in its pursuit of cleanliness and beauty. In the great tapestry of Tudor society, linen wove its threads through every life, but the way it was handled, valued, and endured revealed the stark divisions of class and gender. The whiteness of linen was a universal aspiration, but the labor behind it was anything but equal. For kings, nobles, merchants, and peasants alike, laundry carried meaning, yet it fell most heavily on women, and most invisibly on the poor. The chamber pot, that most intimate of objects, linked high and low in an unseen chain, but it was a chain weighed with inequality. At the summit of society stood the nobility, whose garments gleamed with ostentation. Courtiers paraded in starched collars, spotless shifts, and gleaming cuffs. Their linen served as visual proclamation, wealth, refinement, and proximity to majesty. Yet these garments never bore their sweat for long. Laundresses spirited them away, bleaching them with urine, scrubbing them with ash, rinsing them in perfumed water, and returning them restored. The nobles' only labor was in wearing. The rest fell to invisible hands. Linen for the aristocracy was never merely cloth but a form of political theater, reinforcing the hierarchy of appearances that underpinned Tudor power. The middle classes, the merchants, lawyers, and officials, adopted linen as a badge of respectability. For them, whiteness was less about grandeur than about moral reputation. A tradesman in London could not rival a courtier's silks, but he could ensure his shirt gleamed white, signaling diligence and discipline. His wife bore the burden of that signal. In households that could not afford laundresses, women themselves managed the stink of urine, the ache of scrubbing, the endless cycle of soaking and rinsing. Their work maintained their family standing, as visible in cuffs and collars as in the ledger books of trade. For them, laundry was not political theater but social insurance. The poor bore the hardest burden. A categour's household might own only a few sets of linen, often shared among family members, worn thin by years of use. Yet even they could not escape the tyranny of whiteness. To appear at church in stained linen risked humiliation, whispered judgments, or even accusations of sloth. Thus, the poorest bent over tubs with as much desperation as nobles' laundresses did, though their results were more modest. Urine became their salvation. They could not afford soap in abundance, but their own bodies supplied what was needed. Chamber pots became tools of survival, their contents transmuted into dignity by the alchemy of necessity. The gendered nature of this labor was unmistakable. Laundry was the work of women, wives, daughters, servants, or laundresses by trade. Men might benefit from spotless shirts, but they rarely touched the tubs that whitened them. To wash was to serve, to bend one's body in rhythm with the cycle of filth and renewal. It was women who carried buckets, who tested the sting of land, who endured cracked hands and aching backs. Their labor was unrecorded in chronicles, but etched into their skin. If linen symbolized purity, it was women who sustained that purity at the cost of their own bodies. For women in service, laundry became both a livelihood and burden. Laundresses in noble households or royal palaces worked under constant demand, their toil essential yet unacknowledged. They handled not only soiled garments, but, at times, the intimate evidence of their masters' bodies, sweat, stains, even the marks of illness. They labored in the shadow of hierarchy, invisible except in the whiteness they produced. Their hands transformed waste into spectacle, yet their names seldom entered records. The paradox was cruel. Their work defined appearances, yet they themselves remained unseen. For the wealthy, Urine was hidden behind layers of refinement. Perfumed rinses masked its odor, starch stiffened linen into fashionable shapes, and laundresses ensured no trace of its origins lingered. For the poor, there was no such luxury. The smell of lint lingered longer, and garments dried on hedges bore the faint sting of ammonia. Yet both noble and peasant shared the same chain. Urine lay behind their whiteness. The difference was only in who touched it. The noble never did, the peasant did always. Children, too, were implicated in this economy of laundry. Boys and girls alike carried buckets of water, gathered firewood, or fetched herbs. Girls, in particular, were trained from young ages in the rituals of soaking and scrubbing, learning how to balance lye and urine, how to wring fabric without tearing it, how to whiten without rotting. Laundry became education, apprenticeship into womanhood, shaping bodies and futures alike. For boys, it was often a temporary duty, a burden left behind as they entered fields or trades. For girls, it was destiny, binding them to the cycle of fabric and filth. Even within households, class distinctions were mirrored in laundry. A mistress might oversee, but servants labored. A noblewoman might choose herbs or instruct on starch, but laundresses did the soaking. A poor wife did both, without division. Laundry thus reflected hierarchy not only across society, but within families. The higher one stood, the further one's hands remained from the acrid tubs of lint. The lower one stood, the deeper one's skin was etched with its sting. Yet, in its way, laundry also connected classes. The noble's shirt and the peasant's shift both passed through the same chemical baptism. Both were soaked in urine, scrubbed with labor, spread to whiten in the sun. Both proclaimed dignity, though in different registers. In this sense, laundry was the great equalizer. Everyone relied upon the same pungent alchemy, but it was also a great divide. Some endured the labor, while others merely enjoyed the results. The moral burden weighed heaviest on women. To maintain linen was to maintain virtue, household order, and reputation. A husband's appearance reflected his wife's diligence. A child's clean shirt proclaimed maternal care. Laundry was not merely domestic duty, but moral performance. A stained collar could be read as a sign of negligence, a threat to social standing, even a whisper of sin. Women bore this burden daily, their labor rendered invisible by its very necessity. Thus, class and gender converged in the tubs of Tudor laundry. Nobles displayed whiteness as spectacle, merchants as respectability, peasants as dignity. Men wore whiteness as proof of order, women produced it as proof of virtue. The chamber pot supplied all, yet the hands that transformed it belonged overwhelmingly to women of little power. Laundry was both invisible and indispensable, humiliating and elevating, binding and dividing. In the whiteness of linen, the entire social order of Tudor England was reflected. Kings and peasants, men and women, noble and servant, all were bound by its necessity, yet divided by the burden of producing it. Urine linked them in an unseen chain, pungent and paradoxical, sustaining the illusion of purity across a society built on hierarchy. And in that illusion lay both the fragility and the strength of Tudor life. To understand Tudor laundry, one must step into its world not with the eyes of history alone, but with the senses, for it was above all a sensory experience. It was not silent, nor clean, nor gentle. It was noisy, pungent, tactile, and overwhelming. It demanded the endurance of noses, ears, hands, and eyes, binding the human body to the body of fabric through sensation. The whitening of linen was not abstract. It was lived in every nerve. The smell struck first. The stench of fermented urine, lint, was acrid, sharp, and penetrating. It clung to the nostrils, burning like vinegar, yet heavier, fouler. To walk past a laundry yard on wash day was to be enveloped in it. Foreign visitors remarked upon the odors drifting from fullers' yards and laundries, describing them as intolerable. Yet to Tudors themselves, the smell became the background of necessity. Laundresses breathed it daily, their senses dulled by exposure. To them, it was not filth but the scent of work, the smell of linen becoming pure. Even when perfumed with rosemary or lavender in the final rinse, the ghost of ammonia lingered, haunting the fabric until wear and air dispelled it. The paradox was unmistakable. Purity carried the scent of impurity. Alongside the smell came a sound. The laundry was loud, a cacophony of human effort and watery rhythms. Tubs sloshed as garments were stirred, water splashing against wood. Beetles, flat wooden paddles, thudded against damp cloth with percussive rhythm, a steady beat like drums in a march. Scrubbing boards rasped as fabric dragged across them, a sound rough and insistent. Women's voices rose above it all, gossiping, complaining, singing. In villages, wash day echoed across fields with laughter and song, the music of labor mingling with the crackle of fires heating water. In cities, the din joined the cacophony of street vendors, cart wheels, and church bells, a soundtrack of urban life where laundry had its own distinctive voice. The tactile nature of laundry was perhaps the most punishing. Linen, when soaked and heavy, weighed like stone. To lift sodden sheets from a vat demanded strength, shoulders straining, arms trembling. Fingers, submerged for hours in urine and lye, cracked and reddened. The skin stung, raw from abrasion, nails softened by endless moisture. The laundress's body bore the marks of her craft, blisters, calluses, even burns from caustic solutions. Laundry was not delicate work, it was brute labor, embodied in aching backs and throbbing joints. To wear a crisp white shirt was to forget that it had been born of suffering hands. Sight completed the experience. Wash days turned landscapes into galleries of white. Shirts and shifts fluttered on hedges, sheets spread across meadows, collars stiffened in the sun. The transformation from yellowed, stained cloth to radiant whiteness was visible proof of labor's success. Villages gleamed with fabric after wash day, a collective display of renewal. Yet the sight of laundry in progress was equally vivid. Steaming tubs, gray water pouring out, garments twisted and wrung, laundresses bent in endless motion. It was not a serene picture, but one of chaos, grit, and unrelenting effort. Only when the linen dried, crisp and gleaming, did the illusion of ease return. Taste, too, played its role, though in unwelcome ways. Ammonia vapors could sting the mouth, leaving a metallic tang on the tongue. Smoke from fires drifted into throats, mingling with the scent of herbs. For those laboring closest, the experience of laundry was all-consuming. Every sense engaged, every nerve reminded. It was not something one merely did, it was something one endured. This sensory world shaped cultural memory. The smell of urine, the sound of thudding beetles, the sight of billowing linen. These became markers of domestic rhythm. Children grew up with them, women lived within them, men benefited from them. To Tudors, cleanliness was not abstract virtue but a sensory assault, a ritual of endurance. The purity of linen was born in stink, sweat, and song. The paradox of Tudor laundry is nowhere clearer than in this sensory immersion. Purity smelled foul, whiteness sounded rough, dignity felt raw. Yet from this crucible of discomfort emerged the very symbols of order, virtue, and refinement. The immaculate shirt on a courtier's back, the gleaming altar cloth in a parish church, the crisp sheets on a noblewoman's bed, all carried within them the ghost of laundry's sensory world. To modern minds, accustomed to detergents scented with meadow flowers or ocean breezes, the Tudor experience seems alien. Yet for the laundress, it was daily reality, as familiar as the ringing of a bell. Smell, sound, sight, touch, taste, these were not incidental but essential. They reminded her, and her society, that purity was not free. It was wrested from filth through labor, born on the senses, paid for with endurance. Thus, the sensory world of Tudor laundry reveals more than discomfort. It reveals a philosophy of life itself. To achieve order, one must endure disorder. To gain purity, one must pass through filth. To display dignity, one must suffer indignity. The laundress lived this truth with every breath of ammonia, every thud of her beetle, every ache in her back. Her senses bore the burden of society's demand for whiteness. And in the gleam of linen, the world forgot the stink, the noise, the pain, remembering only the illusion of purity sustained by sensory sacrifice. To Tudor minds, cleanliness was not simply aesthetic, it was bound to health, survival, and the mysteries of the body. Laundry was part of this framework. It protected, it healed, and it reflected the state of one's body and soul. The same urine that whitened linen was also central to medical thought, linking chamber pots to both the sickroom and the laundry yard. In Tudor England, health was woven into fabric, and fabric into health. The body itself was understood through the theory of humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health was the balance of these four fluids, disease their imbalance. Urine was the most accessible mirror of this inner state. Physicians practiced uroscopy, holding flasks of urine to the light, examining its color, clarity, and sediment. To them, pale urine suggested weakness, deep yellow hinted at fever, red or black signaled danger. Charts illustrated shades and textures, guiding diagnoses. The chamber pot thus became a diagnostic instrument. What laundresses poured into tubs to whiten linen, physicians scrutinized as the key to life and death. This overlap reveals the dual role of urine: waste and revelation, impurity and cure. Physicians might prescribe treatments that included urine itself, drinking it as a tonic, applying it to wounds, or using it as an ingredient in ointments. Washerwomen, meanwhile, transformed the same substance into a cleanser of cloth. Both acts were believed to draw out corruption, whether from the body or from fabric. The pungent sting of lint was not only tolerated but valued, proof of its potency. Health and laundry were intimately linked in daily life. Linen was the body's first line of defense. Worn against the skin, it absorbed sweat, dirt, and oils. Without frequent washing, these accumulations festered, breeding lice, fleas, and skin disease. Clean linen reduced risk, offering a measure of protection in a world without modern sanitation. A peasant in stained linen risked illness. A courtier in fresh linen projected vigor. To launder was to maintain health as much as reputation. Linen was not mere garment, but barrier, shield, and diagnostic surface. Urine strengthened this shield. Its ammonia dissolved oils and sweat, lifting impurities that water alone could not. In this sense, laundry was preventative medicine, guarding households against the spread of sickness. In plague years, households doubled their efforts, believing that cleanliness might repel infection. Laundresses soaked garments longer, rinsed more carefully, perfumed more heavily. Though they did not know of bacteria, they understood that filth invited illness. White linen, fresh from the vat, carried the promise of protection. Yet the irony was cruel. Laundresses themselves risked health in their labor. Constant exposure to urine and lye corroded skin, producing sores and rashes. Inhaling ammonia fumes irritated lungs, stung eyes, and could cause faintness. The very act of creating purity inflicted harm on the purifier. Women endured this for their households and employers, their suffering unacknowledged in medical texts that otherwise praised urine's virtues. Health was maintained for some through the sacrifice of others. The intersection of laundry and medicine also extended to ritual. Bathing was infrequent in Tudor England, often feared as dangerous, for hot water was believed to open the pores to disease. Instead, people relied on linen to cleanse indirectly. To change into a fresh shirt was considered almost as good as washing the body itself. Physicians echoed this belief, recommending frequent changes of linen to preserve health. The laundress thus became, unwittingly, a participant in public health. By keeping linen white, she preserved the illusion and reality of cleanliness in a society wary of bathing. Urine's medical uses reinforced its cultural acceptance. Recipes from medical texts prescribed it for toothache, skin ailments, and even plague prevention. A mother might dab a child's cut with urine, believing its stings signaled healing. Soldiers on campaign used it to clean wounds. To apply urine to fabric, then, was not simply practical but consistent with its perceived curative power. If it could heal the body, why should it not heal cloth? The boundary between medical and domestic blurred until both became part of the same logic of purification. Even the language of health echoed laundry. Physicians spoke of cleansing the body, of purging impurities, of restoring balance. Laundresses spoke of purging stains, cleansing cloth, and restoring whiteness. Both sought to strip away corruption, to reveal purity beneath. Both relied on urine as agent of transformation. To the Tudor mind, this symmetry confirmed the unity of nature. What cleansed within also cleansed without. The role of laundry in health extended beyond the individual to the household. In times of illness, linens of the sick were carefully washed, sometimes boiled, sometimes steeped in stronger solutions of urine or lye. It was understood that disease clung to fabric, that to touch a sickbed sheets was to risk contagion. Thus, laundresses bore particular peril in plague years, handling the linens of the dying, their hands becoming conduits of survival or infection. They stood on the front lines of Tudor health, though history rarely acknowledges them. Religious thought reinforced this link between fabric, health, and soul. Just as linen could be stained and purified, so too could the soul be corrupted and redeemed. The metaphors were vivid, familiar to every Tudor. To wear clean linen was to embody not only health, but grace. To neglect it was to invite not only sickness but suspicion of sin. Thus, the laundress's labor carried theological weight as well as medical necessity. In the grand halls of Henry VIII's court, this truth was magnified. The king's shirts did more than clothe his body. They masked his ailments, absorbed his sweats, and concealed the sores of his declining health. Laundresses transformed them daily, bleaching away the evidence of decay, preserving the illusion of vigor. Urine became, in this sense, a medical instrument of monarchy, sustaining not only health but image. The king's body politic was maintained through the chemistry of chamber pots. Thus, the story of Tudor laundry cannot be told without medicine. Urine whitened linen because it was believed to cleanse both cloth and flesh. Linen preserved health because it was believed to absorb and carry away corruption. The laundress became healer in her own right, though unacknowledged, sustaining her family, her community, and even her king through the daily alchemy of filth into purity. In Tudor England, linen was more than fabric to be worn or sheets to be slept upon. It was a mirror of household honor, a dowry in marriage, and a silent language in courtship. Beneath the laughter of feasts and the vows of weddings lay a quieter truth. Whiteness in fabric was tied to whiteness in virtue. The same chamber pots that filled tubs for laundry thus played an invisible role in shaping marriage markets, family alliances, and the reputation of women. The dowry, cornerstone of marriage negotiation, often included linen. When a daughter married, she was expected to bring with her not only coins, livestock, or land, but also household goods, sheets, tablecloths, napkins, and shifts. These were not trifles, but the visible foundation of a new home. An inventory of dowry might list 12 sheets of fine linen, for tablecloths, 6 napkins, each carefully laundered and whitened, prepared for display. Linen was both practical and symbolic. Practical, because it sustained daily life. Symbolic, because it proclaimed a woman's diligence and virtue. A bride's linens were judged as reflections of her worth, her industry, and her ability to govern a household. The connection between whiteness and virtue was explicit. Just as linen must be kept spotless, so too must a woman's reputation. To wear or present stained linen suggested neglect, disorder, even moral failure. The whiteness of a bride's dowry thus proclaimed her purity. Neighbors and kin would take note of her sheets fluttering white in the wind, reading them as signs of chastity and discipline. A dowry of soiled or insufficient linen could harm her chances of marriage. In this way, laundry became currency in the economy of love. Courtship, too, bore traces of linen's symbolism. Young men judged not only a maiden's appearance but the reputation of her household. A family whose laundry gleamed bright proclaimed itself orderly and virtuous, offering assurance that a bride raised in such a household would govern her own with the same care. A shift peeking white from beneath a bodice could be read as subtly as a whispered word. Linen framed the face, touched the skin, and thus became a silent language of desirability. Behind this symbolism, laundresses and mothers worked tirelessly, ensuring that garments whispered the right message. Marriage beds made the symbolism even sharper. The bridal chamber was furnished with white sheets, freshly laundered, perfumed with herbs, displayed for kin and neighbors to see. The whiteness of the marriage bed symbolized the purity of the union. It was both stage and statement. Here virtue met consummation, in linen that declared order and dignity. That the sheets had been steeped in urine days before did not diminish the symbolism. On the contrary, it underscored the paradox of Tudor life. purity born of impurity, dignity forged from waste. Within marriage, linen remained bound to honor. A wife's diligence was judged by the state of her household's fabric. To keep shirts white and sheets spotless was to keep her marriage respectable. Husbands, priests, and neighbors all took notice. Neglecting laundry risked more than stains. It risked whispers of sloth, disorder, even immorality. In this sense, the laundress's labor sustained not only cleanliness but marital harmony. Her work preserved her husband's public image and her household's dignity. Women carried this burden unevenly by class. A noble bride might bring trunks of fine linen, attended by laundresses who maintained them. Her virtue was displayed not only in whiteness but in abundance. A peasant bride, by contrast, might bring only a few sheets, each hard-won, each laundered until thin. Yet the principle was the same: whiteness equaled worth. Even the humblest dowry could gleam with dignity if kept spotless. Urine, once again, became the hidden alchemy that transformed scarcity into honor. The paradox extended to inheritance. Linen often passed through generations, treasured as family wealth. Mothers bequeathed sheets and shirts to daughters, their fibers carrying the imprint of decades of labor. These linens bore not only stains scrubbed away but the memory of hands that whitened them. A daughter who received her mother's linens received also her legacy of virtue. Thus, laundry tied families across generations, weaving the fabric of kinship into the fabric of cloth. Linen also mediated disputes. In marital quarrels, accusations of neglect often took the form of references to laundry. A husband might complain of yellowed shirts, interpreting them as proof of his wife's idleness. A wife might defend herself by pointing to the hours bent over tubs, the sores on her hands. Laundry became both weapon and defense in the politics of marriage. The presence or absence of whiteness was more than aesthetic, it was rhetorical, shaping arguments and judgments. Religious symbolism amplified this role. Just as Christ's followers were described as robed in white, so too were brides expected to clothe themselves in purity. The act of laundering with urine became, in its way, a domestic sacrament, an invisible ritual that prepared women for marriage and sustained households within it. To launder was to rehearse the cleansing of sin. To whiten linen was to affirm faithfulness. Every wash day, in this sense, reinforced marriage vows, whether spoken or unspoken. Court poets and moralists reinforced these associations. Verses praised women whose linen shone bright, mocked those whose garments sagged with stains. Sermons compared unwashed garments to sinful souls, urging diligence in both laundry and devotion. In this cultural climate, the burden of linen became inescapable. Women carried it not only in tubs of water and urine, but in the weight of expectation. Their marriages, reputations, and futures hung on whiteness sustained by their own labor. Thus, linen stood at the heart of Tudor marriage. It was dowry, courtship signal, marital proof, and domestic burden. It proclaimed purity in public, sustained intimacy in private, and passed from mother to daughter as legacy. And behind every gleaming sheet and spotless shift lay the pungent truth that purity was born of urine, that household honor was steeped in waste. The paradox was invisible on wedding days, when white sheets framed the union of bride and groom, but it lingered in every garment thereafter. Laundry was not only the maintenance of fabric, it was the maintenance of love, virtue, and honor in the Tudor world. History rarely records the voices of laundresses. They appear in ledgers as wages paid, in household accounts as for washing linen, in complaints about the stench of laundry yards, but seldom in chronicles or poems. Yet their hands sustained the whiteness of Tudor England, and their voices, though lost to parchment, once echoed across rivers, courtyards, and washhouses. To hear them requires imagination, but imagination guided by fragments, songs, proverbs, satire, and the labor rhythms that shaped their days. Wash day was as much sound as sight. Women bent over tubs sang to lighten toil, their voices weaving through the thuds of beetles and the splash of water. Some songs were bawdy, mocking the very men whose shirts they whitened. Others were laments, voicing weariness. In Scotland and Ireland, where walking songs still survive, one hears the rhythm of collective labor, refrains repeated, verses improvised, lines exchanged. Though England has preserved fewer such fragments, it is not difficult to imagine English laundresses creating their own rhythms, chants to mark soaking, scrubbing, wringing. Their voices filled the air not only with labor, but with solidarity. Proverbs reveal glimpses of their perspective. "A clean shirt hides a foul heart," went one saying, mocking men who paraded in whiteness but lacked virtue. Another observed, "Fair linen, foul hand," acknowledging the paradox that men's spotless garments came from women's raw knuckles. These sayings carry wit, irony, even resistance. Laundresses knew their labor was unseen, their suffering ignored, yet they turned that truth into humor. In their mouths, whiteness became a joke at men's expense, a way of reclaiming dignity amid drudgery. Satirical literature occasionally gave them voice, though filtered through male pens. Writers jested about laundresses gossiping as they worked, spreading news along with whiteness. They became stock figures. The washerwoman with red hands, the gossip by the river, the butt of jokes about stink. Yet beneath mockery lies acknowledgement. They were omnipresent, indispensable. To satirize them was to admit their power, for they sustained appearances upon which men relied. Their invisibility in chronicles was matched by their ubiquity in daily life. Their labor created a culture of its own. Washhouses and riversides became women's spaces, where they shared stories, warned each other of hazards, exchanged remedies for sores caused by lye or urine, and passed down techniques. Mothers taught daughters how long to soak, how to balance mixtures, how to judge by smell when lint was strong enough. In these spaces, women preserved knowledge that never entered books, sustaining domestic science in oral tradition. Theirs was a hidden school, a culture of craft passed through bodies and voices rather than parchment. Resistance, too, found quiet expression. A laundress might delay returning a garment as subtle protest against mistreatment. She might whisper gossip about a master's soiled sheets, weaponizing knowledge gleaned from intimate labor. For in laundry, secrets were revealed, stains that betrayed gluttony, illness, or infidelity. Laundresses handled the most private evidence of their employers' lives, and though they were expected to keep silent, they possessed power. Their voices, shared among themselves, carried truths the world preferred hidden. In this sense, laundry was not only service but surveillance. Songs provided the safest outlet. To sing was to express without accusation, to transform toil into rhythm, complaint into melody. Children who lingered near washhouses would carry home fragments of refrains. The soundscape of Tudor towns thus carried echoes of women's voices rising above the stink of urine. These songs did not enter the annals of kings, but they lingered in memory, shaping culture at its edges. The humor of laundresses often turned the paradox of purity inside out. "What's white once was foul," one might say, pointing to the urine that bleached linen. In laughter, they exposed the hypocrisy of noble pretensions. The courtier who strutted in brilliance owed his dignity to their stinking tubs. Their wit, though unrecorded, must have been sharp, for in humor lay their only shield against invisibility. To joke was to remind themselves, and each other, that though their labor was dismissed, it was indispensable. The laundress's culture was also marked by solidarity. Washhouses were communal, not solitary. Women supported one another, shared burdens, and sometimes fought side by side for rights. In London, records of disputes between laundresses and civic authorities suggest that they defended their spaces fiercely. They knew their labor sustained the city, and though they lacked official power, their collective voice could not be ignored. Their culture, born of toil, carried quiet defiance. Yet tragedy shadowed their songs. Exposure to urine and lye scarred their skin. Endless bending and lifting wore their backs. Illness was common, poverty nearly universal. They rarely rose in station. Their daughters inherited their burdens. Their voices did not echo in courts or pulpits, but they echoed in riversides, shaping the daily soundscape of England. In their laughter, complaint, gossip, and song, they created a counterpoint to the silence imposed by history. To imagine their voices is to restore humanity to the hidden foundations of Tudor life. When Henry VIII strode in gleaming linen, when noble women reclined in white sheets, when parish altars shone with spotless cloths, the voices of laundresses rang in the background, singing, joking, lamenting. Their culture, though invisible to history, was woven into every garment, every sheet, every display of whiteness. Thus, the hidden voices of laundresses remind us that history is not only battles and kings, but songs sung over tubs, proverbs whispered in kitchens, jokes shared in the sting of ammonia. Their labor whitened linen, but their voices sustained spirit. And though the chronicles are silent, if one listens closely to the fabric of Tudor life, their voices can still be heard, faint but enduring, like echoes rising above the stink of land on a wash day long gone. The laundry of Tudor England was not only a domestic ritual, but an industry, sprawling in scale, organized in systems, and essential to the machinery of society. Nowhere was this more evident than in the royal household, where the demands of Henry VIII's wardrobe turned laundry into a logistical operation, but the same principle echoed in towns and cities across England. Laundries functioned as proto-businesses, employing teams of women, requiring steady supply chains of urine, firewood, water, and herbs, and sustaining the illusion of purity on an almost industrial scale. The royal laundries were immense. Henry VIII's appetite for clothing bordered on obsession. Accounts record hundreds of shirts commissioned annually, alongside endless doublets, cloaks, and gowns. Each shirt had to be washed, whitened, and returned swiftly. The king's linen passed through a chain of laundresses who worked not for honor, but for survival. Their names buried in household accounts, but their labor indispensable. Records from the royal wardrobe detail payments for the women of the laundry, listing sums that, though meager, hint at the sheer number employed. Royal laundresses had to function as a regiment, keeping pace with the king's demands as though in military formation. This industrial nature was reinforced by the organization of supply. Urine could not be left to chance. The laundries of court and city contracted regular sources, purchasing from households, inns, and taverns. In London, where the royal household consumed staggering quantities, urine collection became a structured practice. Buckets were carried from alehouses, chamber pots emptied by agreed arrangement, vats stored for fermentation. Laundresses did not simply wait for urine to arrive. They managed it like raw material in a factory. Waste became commodity, and its flow was as crucial as the flow of grain or wool. The laundries also consumed immense resources of water and firewood. To boil linens required great cauldrons, kept steaming for hours. Fires devoured wood, and water was fetched by bucket from rivers or wells. Entire teams of servants or children were employed just to carry fuel and water. The logistics were staggering. Laundries resembled miniature industries, coordinating inputs, labor, and outputs in steady rhythm. In this, they foreshadowed the factories of later centuries. Urban laundries expanded the scale further. In London, public washhouses bustled with activity, serving not only households but inns, guilds, and institutions. Taverns and hostels relied on laundresses to keep sheets and table linens white, for reputation depended on cleanliness as much as hospitality. Hospitals and monasteries employed laundries on vast scale, their beds and altars demanding constant renewal. Each institution functioned as a proto-business, paying laundresses in wages or food, organizing work by rota, and ensuring steady supply of urine and lye. Guilds intersected with this system. While laundresses themselves rarely formed guilds, the fullers and dyers who shared reliance on urine were tightly organized. Their workshops resembled industries in miniature: vats, tools, apprentices, regulations. Laundries overlapped with them in supply chains, competing for urine or cooperating in purchase. In this way, laundry connected domestic labor to the broader economy of cloth, binding households to industries. The scale of laundries reveals the hidden infrastructure of Tudor society. We think of ships and palaces, of markets and courts, but linen was as fundamental as any of these. Without whitened linen, dignity faltered, reputation suffered, and health risked decline. The laundries ensured the smooth operation of daily life, though they left no monuments. Their monuments were shirts on men's backs, sheets on noble beds, altar cloths gleaming at Massachusetts. Their industry was invisible yet omnipresent. The industrial nature of laundries also revealed the hierarchy of labor. Women performed the scrubbing and soaking, while men often managed procurement, wood, water, urine, turning waste into structured supply. In towns, the boundary between home and business blurred. Women washed at home for hire, transforming domestic space into workplace. A cottage with tubs and vats could become a micro-laundry, serving wealthier neighbors. In this way, laundry offered women limited economic opportunity, though at terrible physical cost. Royal laundries stood apart in prestige, but not in essence. Their laundresses suffered the same cracked hands, inhaled the same fumes, endured the same toil. Yet their work carried political weight. A stained shirt for a king was scandal, a wrinkled altar cloth blasphemy. Thus, the laundries of court bore responsibility far beyond their means, their labor propping up the stage of monarchy. To whiten the king's shirts was to whiten the face of England before Europe. The laundresses became invisible diplomats, their work woven into the politics of image. Urban laundries mirrored proto-industrial organization in other ways. Payments were tracked, supplies managed, schedules maintained. Clients expected promptness and perfection, and laundresses organized their work in cycles to meet demand. Complaints could ruin reputations, so the pressure to deliver was immense. These systems foreshadowed the wage labor and structured production of later centuries, reminding us that industry begins not in steam engines, but in tubs and vats. The economic footprint of laundry was vast. Firewood sellers profited from wash days, potters from chamber pots, coopers from vats, herb sellers from perfuming sprigs. The circulation of urine created networks of exchange, binding households to markets. The economy of whiteness was not confined to the laundry yard. It rippled outward, touching multiple trades. In this sense, the laundries of Tudor England were not marginal, but central to the economy, though hidden beneath more glamorous industries. Thus, laundries must be understood as industries in their own right. They employed teams, required supply chains, consumed resources, and produced essential outputs. They connected the intimate to the public, the domestic to the political. They sustained monarchy, religion, commerce, and health. They were, in every sense, proto-factories of cleanliness, powered not by machines but by women's bodies, fueled not by coal but by waste. To walk past a Tudor laundry yard was to glimpse industry in miniature. Vats steaming, fires crackling, garments hanging in rows, women laboring in rhythm, children running with buckets, men arriving with loads of urine from taverns. It was the unseen factory of Tudor life, producing not cloth or goods, but whiteness itself, the whiteness upon which dignity, reputation, and power depended. Every practice, no matter how entrenched, eventually meets its end. The use of urine to whiten laundry, so central to Tudor life, did not vanish overnight, but slowly receded under the pressure of new discoveries, new products, and shifting sensibilities. By the late 16th and 17th centuries, England and its neighbors began to transition away from land, guided not only by changing technology, but by changing attitudes toward waste, cleanliness, and science itself. The first shift lay in soap. Though known for centuries, soap in Tudor England was costly, often imported from Spain or Italy, made from olive oil and lye. Its expense kept it from daily use, especially for the poor. Urine remained cheaper, abundant, and familiar. But as trade expanded, soap became more accessible, its manufacture more localized. English soap boiling grew into a modest industry, producing blocks that households could afford. Though never fully replacing urine at first, soap began to supplement it, especially among the wealthy, who prized refinement. To launder with soap was to elevate one's household, to mark a step above neighbors still relying on chamber pots. The second shift came from science. The Tudor worldview, steeped in humor and alchemy, began to yield to new ways of thinking. Natural philosophers, experimenting with salts, acids, and distillations, gradually explained urine's properties in terms of substances rather than spirits. Ammonia and other compounds were identified, their effects understood. Once mysteries were explained, the practice lost some of its inevitability. If urine whitened because of its chemistry, then perhaps other substances could do the same. Curiosity bred alternatives, and alternatives bred change. Religious upheaval also played a role. The Reformation fractured old symbols of purity. While white linen remained valued, its spiritual resonance shifted. Altars still bore spotless cloths, but the intensity of association between whiteness and sanctity softened. Domestic virtue no longer demanded the same sacramental whiteness. Practical cleanliness sufficed. This easing of symbolic burden reduced the moral necessity of urine. Soap or other agents could achieve acceptable results without carrying the pungent stigma of land. Urbanization further accelerated the decline. As cities grew, laundries multiplied, and the stench of urine in workshops and streets became harder to tolerate. Civic authorities, increasingly concerned with public health, sought to regulate waste. Complaints about fullers' yards and laundries rose in council records. Soap, though still costly, offered a cleaner-smelling alternative. The urban middle classes, eager to distinguish themselves from the poor, embraced soap as refinement. Urine, once universal, began to mark poverty. What was once a necessity became stigma, yet the decline was uneven. In rural England, where soap remained scarce, urine endured well into the 17th century. Peasant households continued to steep their linens in chamber pots, guided by tradition more than science. In towns, laundresses clung to land where clients could not afford soap, for profit demanded thrift. The practice waned slowly, not in sudden revolution, but in gradual erosion. Generations overlapped, mothers teaching daughters to soak linen in urine even as younger women experimented with soap. By the 18th century, the balance had tipped. Soap manufacture flourished, bolstered by trade in oils and colonial resources. Ammonia's properties were harnessed in controlled forms, reducing dependence on urine. The pungent tubs of lint receded from yards and washhouses, remembered more with distaste than nostalgia. The whiteness of linen remained essential, but its foundation shifted. Science and commerce supplanted chamber pots, turning what was once universal necessity into historical curiosity. The decline of urine in laundry mirrored broader transformations. It reflected the rise of consumer culture, where purchased goods replaced homemade solutions. It reflected the triumph of chemistry over alchemy, where explanations displaced traditions. It reflected the refinement of sensibilities, where the foul could no longer serve the fair without shame. It marked England's passage from Tudor resourcefulness to modern cleanliness, from a world of paradox to one of specialization. Yet one must resist the temptation to view this decline as mere progress. The Tudor reliance on urine, though pungent to modern eyes, embodied ingenuity. It revealed a society that wasted nothing, that turned necessity into virtue, that bound high and low in shared practices. Its disappearance erased not only a smell but a cultural logic, a worldview in which purity could emerge from impurity, dignity from waste. Soap may have smelled sweeter, but it severed the paradox that had sustained centuries. By the time industrial detergents arose, the memory of urine in laundry had faded into ridicule. Satirists mocked the past, historians glossed it as eccentricity, the public shuddered at its foulness. Yet beneath mockery lies amnesia. For hundreds of years, Europe's whiteness, its shirts, its sheets, its altars, was born of chamber pots. The decline of urine was less the erasure of oddity than the erasure of memory, the forgetting of the acrid foundation upon which refinement had stood. Thus, the story of urine in laundry closes not with abruptness, but with quiet retreat. Soap and science took its place. Sensibility rewrote its symbolism. The laundress's tubs emptied of plant, replaced by bars of fragrant soap. The air of washhouses cleared, and with it vanished a world of paradox. But history remembers. To trace the whiteness of Tudor linen is to recall the pungent truth that the brilliance of one age rests on foundations another age prefers forgotten. To walk through Tudor England with the eyes of history is to glimpse splendor and squalor intertwined. It is to see Henry VIII striding in a shirt so white it dazzled, while laundresses bent over tubs of fermenting urine made it possible. It is to hear the drums of justs and courtly music, while in village yards the thud of wooden beetles and the splash of tubs created a counterpoint no less essential. The Tudor age, like all ages, was built not only by kings and courtiers, but by the unrecorded labor of ordinary people and the strange ingenuity of necessity. The practice of laundering with urine embodies this paradox. Waste became resource. Foulness became the servant of purity. The chamber pot, symbol of secrecy and shame, became the crucible of dignity and virtue. Urine whitened linen because ammonia dissolved sweat and oils, though Tudors spoke of humors and essences. The chemistry mattered less than the result. Shirts and sheets emerged spotless, ready to proclaim order and morality. In this cycle of impurity birthing purity lay the very logic of Tudor society, where contradictions were embraced rather than erased. It was more than domestic craft, it was survival. Linen shielded bodies, preserved health, and protected costly outer garments. Its whiteness signaled moral order, social standing, and spiritual devotion. And behind each garment lay the unpaid cost. Women's hands raw from lye, lungs stung by fumes, backs bent in endless toil. Their names are lost, yet their work shaped every scene of Tudor life. The king's magnificence, the noblewoman's dignity, the peasant's respectability, all were washed into being by laundresses steeping cloth in waste. To forget them is to forget the true foundations of history. Urine's role also reveals the resourcefulness of the age. Tudor England was not wealthy in materials, but rich in ingenuity. Nothing was wasted. The body itself became a supplier for the household economy. Chamber pots fed not only fields and gardens, but laundries and workshops. Waste was transformed into currency, into commodity, into necessity. In this cycle of reuse, Tudor society displayed a resilience that modern sensibilities often overlook. What disgusts us sustained them. What we discard without thought they turned into survival. Yet the paradox was not eternal. Soap, trade, and science gradually replaced urine, erasing its place in daily life. By the 18th century, the pungent vats of lint had receded into memory, mocked as barbarous relics of a cruder age. But this forgetting is itself revealing. We prefer to imagine history in silks and jewels, not in chamber pots and wash tubs. Yet without the latter, the former could never have gleamed. The brilliance of Tudor spectacle was born not in palaces alone, but in laundry yards, in riverside wash days, in the acrid air of urine. What does this tell us? That history is built on paradox. That purity often hides impurity. Dignity conceals indignity. Power rests on the backs of the powerless. To study urine in Tudor laundry is to confront this truth without ornament. It is to acknowledge that kings depend on laundresses, that magnificence depends on waste, that human ingenuity is as pungent as it is profound. And it is also to see ourselves reflected. Modern life, with its detergents and machines, prefers to forget its debts to the foul and the humble. Yet we too are sustained by hidden labor, by unseen industries, by transformations that turn waste into utility. To remember Tudor urine is to remember that human survival has always depended on turning what is base into what is noble, what is discarded into what is essential. So let us honor the paradox. The whiteness of Tudor linen was born of urine. The brilliance of Tudor power was born of laundresses. The dignity of a kingdom was born of the stink of waste. This is not a story of eccentricity, but of survival, of ingenuity, of humanity at its most paradoxical. To see Henry VIII in gleaming white is to smell, faintly behind him, the acrid tubs that made it possible. To remember this is to remember history in full, not only its silks and crowns, but its chamber pots too.